Today, I would like to talk about the nature of history, which was the last lecture of this semester given by our professor. First of all, since history is written by a certain subject, we can say that history may be subjective. Moreover, because history is something written by someone, history is certain knowledge of that particular person. This is why there can be a problem with history in terms of it not being about objects or contents of the story, but the knowledge of a certain person that explains a certain story. In other words, the objects or contents are not the principal problem of history, the knowledge is. The knowledge we talk about here, though, can only be in possession of a few people, as only a limited number of people have a sense of knowledge. There may be many lawyers and judges, but only a number of these people have a well enough sense of knowledge, knowing, or the theory of knowledge. Despite the fact that history is written by someone and therefore can be subjective, it is still history. Thus, history is only the way it is today because someone has written it, and there is no other way to record history. History then can be told and written in many different ways. The professor mentioned that when discussing history, the key feature is time. There are three different types of time. First of all, there is psychological time, which is presented in the human consciousness, as well as the intentional acts of human beings. Secondly, there is physical time, which can be defined by natural sciences. Last of all, there is a notion of an eternal time, and this is an important issue because without eternity, human beings would not be able to find a certain momentum and meaning of their psychological time. In the second part of our lecture, the professor explained and mentioned the relationship between historical experience and historical knowledge. Without experience, there would be no knowledge at all. For historical knowledge to exist, historical experience, historical understanding, and historical judging all need to exist as well. Historical experience is to be understood and judged by historians as a human subject. This idea leads to the third part of the lecture the professor gave us. The third part of the lecture is about history and historians. Every human being can be an historian, but can be divided into historians who follow history either passively or actively. Between these two types of historians, only the people who follow history actively are authentic subjects that are willing and able to make their own authentic history. These historians who are active are most likely to be attentive, reasonable, responsible, and intelligent, as people who have such characteristics are the ones who are willing and able to make an authentic history of their own. Moreover, historical consciousness is another key factor the professor talked about during the lecture. And this historical consciousness is needed for one to be responsible for one's own actions. In this consciousness, which is the key fact of the nature of history, we can say that experiencing, understanding, and judging are consisted in it. In terms of the judgment part, we can say that there are two related but able to distinguish terms: judgment of historical facts and judgment of historical value. The judgment of historical value is very subjective, as it depends on subjective convictions or beliefs rather than objective beliefs. Every human being is a subject of bias, thus our beliefs can be based on misjudgments and undiscovered myths. We all have different thoughts and perspectives, therefore no one can say that they themselves are neutral or objective in their thought of any subject. To sum up the main and essential points the professor has lectured, the history we are aware of today is not just made up through certain events, historical evidence, or interpretations of these historical evidences. In fact, history is made up through authentic historical judgments of the history by an authentic historian. As mentioned earlier, the historical consciousness of the authentic historian is an essential factor in completing history. Therefore, human knowledge not always being perfect, history can always be corrected and changed over time, since history made through human knowledge would not be perfect either. That was our last lecture by our professor, and thank you for listening.